Foal of the Wastes. Written by Etyco Philly. Part 1. Caged. Chapter 1. Born in a Cage. I stared blankly at my homework. Ponish sucked. Literature sucked. Writing about literature sucked even more. How was it that a bookworm like me hated the theory behind books so much? I wondered how the other foals managed. Mother always told me they were beneath me. That's why I couldn't play with them. As the overstallion's filly, I was expected to outperform every pony else, and couldn't risk having them hold back my abilities. I was smart. I didn't feel like it, but if Mother said so, then it had to be true. Unlike the other foals in Stable 4, I was destined for greatness. I'd originally had the school teacher come give me lessons, but Mother decided it wasn't necessary, that I was fine without him, and that she would decide on my lesson plan instead. If I, a smart pony, struggled with my curriculum, then that meant the other foals struggled even more. I found comfort in that thought, maybe even happiness. Whatever it was, it helped me get through life. I realized that I needed a break from my homework. Desperately. Knowing both my parents were occupied with their jobs, I decided to take one now. Using my telekinesis, I pushed my desk till it hit the wall under the vent and grabbed my slippers. They helped muffle the sound of hoofsteps on the thin metal. I floated my office chair up onto the desk and climbed on it. After using my magic to pull out the vent cover's loose screws, I pulled the sheet of metal out. I telekinetically held the office chair in place and used it to climb into the shaft, wincing as I accidentally applied pressure to my bruises. They weren't that recent, so they didn't hurt unless I touched them, but they clearly hadn't healed yet. Once inside, I moved the furniture back into place and slid the metal cover back into the duct, keeping the screws on my side. Some pony could accidentally dislodge it if they hit this wall hard enough, but it was my only option. I couldn't get them back into place, but at least I could hide them. It was mostly precaution for the off chance that I ever got caught outside my parents' quarters. If I was able to have them believe me I was let out by someone, instead of sneaking out by myself, I'd be able to shift some of the blame off of me. And, more importantly, be able to keep my passage into the rest of the stable secret. Standing at my full height in the vent, I started walking towards the intersection, my slippers muffling my already soft steps. Of course, my plan was to never get caught, but I couldn't live without a plan B. Too many things to go wrong. In theory. I know they would never happen, however. My parents took their jobs way too seriously to skip their shifts. On top of that, no one else used the vents to move around, and only maintenance ponies ever opened them. Stumbling onto one of my mother's underlings with their heads up in the ducts was actually one of the risks with the higher chance of happening. Thankfully, my pit book was able to help minimize that risk. One of the more interesting features of the sleek white device around my right forehoof was its EFS, Eyes Forward Sparkle. It showed all moving things in a certain range as white bars in my vision. The main downside was that I never knew what story they were on. Though, another disadvantage was that it also showed cleaning robots. Without any particular destination in mind, I turned right. As far as I knew, most ponies really didn't use their EFS. In a densely populated stable such as 4, it wasn't very helpful, as the interface was way too cluttered. For me, however, it became a mandatory survival tool. I learned that if a pony was close by, then their bar would move faster when I walked past it. I had been using this knowledge to check corners where I thought some pony could be. This actually saved me from being caught a handful of times. Most of the time, though, it just slowed me down. However, given that I couldn't allow myself to get caught, being overly cautious was clearly the better option. I wandered around for a dozen minutes before one of the white bars on my EFS started moving quicker than all the others. Since this was no intersection here, I had assumed it was either inside a room or on a different floor entirely. The latter was much likelier than the former, given that all the ponies living in this area worked B shift, which was now. I approached the grate and carefully peeked over. To my surprise, I spotted Midnight Sonata through an open door down the hallway. Focused on her work, she didn't notice me. She was a dark blue filly about my age. Unlike me, she already had her cutie mark, a gray treble clef surrounded by a crescent moon and stars. Fillies like her, I remembered hearing Mother say, were what happened when you didn't get as lucky as me. Her family couldn't afford education past the most basic knowledge, and so she had to pick a job around the stable at a young age. In her case, it was cleaning ponies' quarters. That was one of the worst paying jobs around the stable, as only ponies who couldn't afford a cleaning robot hired them. Given her cutie mark, she likely would have made a good musician, maybe great even. Too bad that future was crossed off for her now. For some reason, seeing her never filled me with the same glee I usually felt when I saw some pony worse off than me. It helped me cope with how difficult my life was. But whenever I saw her, I couldn't help but imagine myself in her situation. Maybe it was because she shared part of my name. Whatever the cause may be, I didn't like seeing her. I decided to move along. But my thoughts wouldn't leave her topic alone. I wondered how her name had matched so well with the cutie mark that she ended up getting. Maybe her parents were musicians and knew she would grow up to become one as well. Well, given that she was poor, her parents were most likely mediocre musicians at best. But then, how come I didn't inherit my parents' special talents? I tried music, singing, playing a few different instruments, composing, and nothing caught my attention. I just wasn't music-y, or artsy, or anything else that required creativity. Mother's special talent, on the other hoof, was something I was much more interested in. Understanding machines and fixing them felt like a fun puzzle or game. I'd even learned some spells from her books. I knew how to polish pieces using only my magic, and I'd even managed to conjure a pencil from my desk. The spell was normally meant for other tools, like screwdrivers or hammers, but I didn't have any of those on hoof. It worked like a hyper-specialized teleportation spell. You could only use it on simple tools whose exact location you knew. It also had a fairly unimpressive effective range. More than 20 meters between you and your tool, and it wouldn't work. Unfortunately for me, neither the spells nor machines were apparently interesting enough to net me a cutie mark. Mother told me that if by my next birthday and I still didn't have a cutie mark, I would have to take an aptitude test. Those were usually meant for less wealthy citizens who had to start working early in their lives. Not as early as poor midnight, but still much earlier than I'd ever have to. I turned another corner. I'd come here to clear my thoughts, not muddy them further. I needed to see adults struggling, deciding to watch the maintenance ponies at their work. I made my way to the vertical tunnels near the center of the stable. On my EFS, I could see that a flurry of white bars were near me, but as I peeked into the hallway below, I couldn't see any pony or robot. This wasn't very surprising to me, given that I was right above the stable's atrium. Every time I went to the upper floors, I was grateful for the thoughtfulness of the ponies who designed the stable. At most vertical sections, a ladder could be found, likely put there in order to help maintenance ponies get at the electronics inside. I slowly climbed the ladder, careful as to avoid making any noise. I emerged into the large primary vent. In each direction, I found a grate that could help expose me if I crossed over it recklessly. Because I was still above the atrium, my EFS was nigh useless, and I had to inspect the corridor below myself. Warily, I peeked over the grate to my right, and noticed two ponies below. One was approaching the other, and they made eye contact. Deeming it safe, I kept watching. I spotted one of the stable technicians working on something in the wall. I recognized him. Crescent Hammer. I knew all the ponies working under Mother, mostly out of curiosity. Of course, only a few of them were new to me. I was never allowed out of my family's quarters, after all. The second buck I didn't recognize, however. He was a large gray unicorn wearing security barding. "Hey, Crescent." "Hey, yourself, Steelhorn. Can't chat for long today. Have lots of work." "More than usual?" "Yeah, the overstallions came to me directly. Was hardcore miffed. Claimed that I wasn't working quick enough. I can't help it though. I'm working as fast as I can." "Fuck, dude, that sucks. What even is so pressing?" "Dunno. He just wants me to install manual overrides in each of the doors, even up here. Shit, dude, I shouldn't even be telling you all this. You didn't hear that from me. Hell, you didn't hear it at all." I mean, sure thing, bro. But is it that secret? He told me not to tell any pony about it. He was very hush-hush about it, so maybe his wife doesn't even know. Especially since she's usually the one giving me orders. The buck sighed. To be honest, I'd much have rather Brass yell at me than him. She's much gentler and much more reasonable with her demands. If she yells at me, I know it's my fault. Yeah, I get you, bro. Between the two of us, I feel like she's also much more competent than him. Almost, I feel like she should have become overmare when they got married. Steelhorn whispered, looking around cautiously, prompting me to hide. I think she's just way too dedicated to her job. She likes being head of maintenance too much to step down and take over the more boring bureaucratic stuff. I think she's also in charge of educating our kid. Could be, but I'd wager the megalomaniac just didn't accept to marry her unless she promised him he couldn't have the post. I kinda miss the old overmare, to be honest, Crescent Hammer admitted. Me too, but after her wife died, it was only a matter of time before someone else amassed more money than her. Not aching to be reminded of my father, I left in the middle of their conversation, but had still heard it echoing until I was back in the residential story. Lately, complaints about the overstallion were more and more common, while he had been more violent towards me than usual. I never bothered figuring out the details. I always avoided thinking or hearing of him. I continued my walk in a big circle around the stable, hoping to eavesdrop on an interesting conversation, one that didn't involve my father, hopefully. No such luck for me. After half an hour, I'd finally grown bored enough to go back home to write my essay. As I turned into the vent that led to my room, however, I was petrified. I could hear mutters and loud thuds coming from my room. I flattened my body against the floor of the duct, hoping to remain unseen. Where the fuck is that little cunt? My father said, apparently trying hard to keep his voice low. He threw something against the wall, and I could only speculate it was my chair. I gulped in fear, which I immediately regretted doing. Did he hear that? How the fuck did she even get out of here? I could hear it in his tone. He was seething with rage, madder than he'd ever been, more furious than I'd ever experienced him. And worst of all, it was with me. I was used to him taking out his general frustrations on me, but I'd rather been the direct cause for his anger, and certainly never to such an extent. I couldn't go in there. I wouldn't come back out alive. As if reading my mind, he half muttered, half screamed. I'll fucking kill her. It took out every last drop of my self-control not to bolt the other ways as fast as my legs could carry me. Instead, I slowly pushed myself backwards. I didn't stand up until every last brain cell was convinced there was no way he could see me. Even as I turned around, I knew I'd put reasonable distance between him and me. It still took me a considerable amount of effort to not start running. It was only when I was near the center of the stable that my thinking deviated from pure fear. I needed to stay hidden until Father's next shift. Maybe longer. Until his mood calmed. So, potentially forever. No, don't be a fatalist, Tyron. Which meant I needed money to buy food and drinks from the vending machines. With some luck, I could steal enough bits for a couple of months from Father's vault. Opening the safe wouldn't be hard. I knew the combination. 535738. However, I would have to return when he wasn't there. The overstallion worked to be shipped, so I would need to wait about 20 hours until he left our quarters. However, hiding was my priority. From my experiments with my pipbuck, I knew you could track one if you had its tag. I didn't know whether my father had my tag, but I was not going to bet my life he didn't. Always hope for the best, but expect the worst. Mother's voice echoed in my mind. This meant I needed to steal tools from the pipbuck technician's office. I glanced down at my left foreleg. The white casing looked fragile enough to be broken if bucked by an average adult. Unfortunately for me, I was not an average adult. Truth be told, I was significantly weaker than even the average filly. Even if I did manage to break it, there was no guarantee the tracking functionality would stop working. I needed to get the entire thing off my leg if I wanted to be completely sure I wouldn't be tracked. I decided to head towards the pipbuck technician's quarters. She was one of the few ponies who knew how to read their EFS, and thus had almost noticed me on more than one occasion. Because of this, I had learned her daily routine. She worked C shift and stayed in her quarters that entire time. I presumed she slept during A shift, and so the only time I needed to be careful was during B shift. Although even then, the reclusive mare sometimes stayed in her quarters. In normal times, that was beneficial to me. Now, however, I was hoping she was out doing whatever it was she did. I turned corner after corner until I arrived near my destination. A hoofful of bars appeared in my EFS in the direction of her room. Only one, however, moved fast enough to be inside her room. I cursed my luck, but decided to take the risk, and approached the shaft entering her room. I cursed my luck again as I spotted her, reading a book at her desk with tools sprawled out all around it. One of those had to be the one I needed. It would only be a matter of time before she'd move and notice the immobile, close-by bar on her EFS. With any luck, she'd think I was on a different floor. My luck, however, was not worth counting on, especially when dealing with one of the sharper adults in the stable. This meant I needed to wait at least 12 hours, possibly more, until she went to bed. Plan A was to hope to Celestia I was sneaky enough to rummage through her tools while she was asleep. Plan B was to wait until B shift and until she left for breakfast. On its own, Plan A was infinitely riskier than Plan B. However, since Plan B involved more waiting, i.e. more time during which I could get caught, I couldn't determine which had the better odds. In either case, I needed to hide for half a day and hope that it wasn't enough time to be found. And I was not improving my chances by staying in the proximity of the EFS goddess. So I turned around and left. Since I was back to looking in the direction of the atrium, my vision was full of white bars, and the cluttered interface reminded me of something. That something was the stable's fourth story. It was deep in maintenance territory, and not a place I usually visited. Part of the reason was that it was simply scary up there. The lights were even darker than the third floors, and an ominous hum could be heard throughout it. More relevantly, however, my Pip-Buck's EFS always went haywire in there. I guessed that the stable talisman somehow hampered with the spell matrix of my Pip-Buck. That was good. That meant that the tracking spell built into it was likely going to face interference up there. This meant I had more time, and it also meant the risks of Plan B were mitigated. Of course, I wasn't sure how I couldn't be found up there, but the probability seemed low enough to be worth a try. Tomorrow, B shift, I would steal a couple hundred bits from my father's safe. Not that he would miss them. Then, I would stand by the technician's room, identify which bar was hers, safely wait until she went to the atrium, borrow her tools, and live forever after on the fourth floor. What could possibly go wrong? No, bad brain. Cancel that thought right now. I headed upwards and spent the rest of B shift walking around the vents and making mental notes on which rooms I could sleep in the future. I mostly needed a room with easy vent access. Ideally, it needed to be quiet and be rarely accessed by ponies. I stumbled upon a couple of locked rooms with a control terminal next to them. Those unfortunately had a security grate locking off the vents that led inside them. Damn those stable tech ponies and their thoughtfulness. I suspected my father's credentials could open any of those rooms, and regretted not having paid attention when I'd seen him type them. As C-shift came around, I decided I would spend the night in the vent. The pair of rooms I'd found in the corner of the stable seemed fine and ticked all my boxes, but I couldn't tell how often a pony would make their way into them. They certainly seemed unused, but I wasn't taking any chances. Besides, I remembered how I could only unscrew the vent covers with a screwdriver. I was angry at myself for overlooking such a detail, but it was an easy fix. If I stole a small screwdriver from anywhere maintenance related, really, I laid down in a corner of the duct, since that was where I was least likely to get blown away in case the fan started spinning full throttle. Normally, I went to bed around the middle of C shift. I tried going to sleep at the end of B shift, but when my father came home angry, he'd wake me up and expect me to come talk to him. If I said anything wrong, though, it would be enough to ignite his frustrations and get him to beat me. The worst when he would beat me there. Nope, not thinking about that. Buzz off, brain. My tail and hindquarters itched. I shook my head, trying to shake off the thought, then pressed my eyes shut. Luckily for me, all the tumult from the day seemed to have taken a toll on me. and when I turned my attention to my body, feeling how tired I really was, I started to relax. Maybe things will be better tomorrow. Maybe I'm not actually in any danger. I woke up on a hard surface with a soft voice calling to me. I'd fallen out of bed again, hadn't I? Too sleepy. I didn't bother getting back into bed. The voice, however, insisted. Iron Sonata? A mare called softly. Couldn't it wait? I was a little filly, still growing. I needed my sleep. Come on, wake up! The voice said again. I groaned. This simple physical act shook my whole brain awake, and I very suddenly remembered where I was, and why I was there. Oh, pony feathers! My eyes shot open, and I saw a lifted ventilation grate with a mare's head poking through. All the other parts of my brain woke up at the same time as I shrieked and got to my hooves. Bad idea. I hit my horn in my head hard on the ceiling, and saw the mare's expression quickly turn to shock and concern, while my own vision rapidly filled with black. I woke up in a small room, on a soft, oh so soft, bed. This time, I had more time to process my surroundings. I could hear a muffled conversation coming from the vent above me. I remember what had happened earlier. I recalled the mare's face and realized that I knew her. She'd been a filly just a few months ago. No longer. It had been almost a year since I'd last seen her, and her name was Candy Cane. Well, by that I meant that she only started working in security. Before that, I'd seen her in the school quarters. She was also one of the few ponies in 4 I'd actually talked to. Her mother was head of security, and long ago, she used to visit our quarters quite often, sometimes even bringing her daughter along. She and I played together a lot, but her stays at our quarters had grown increasingly rare with time. I think I missed her. I turned my attention in front of me, where I found a glass of water that I happily downed in a few gulps, before looking around the room again. I didn't know personal quarters enough to figure out whose this was based on looks alone. I was always too cautious to look inside a pony's personal space if I could help it, but I could imagine this was her living space. I glanced at the door. Behind it were 2 white bars. Wanting to confirm the proximity, I bobbed my head left to right. This proved to be a mistake, as a pain shot through my entire head, culminating in the back of it. I closed my eyes and waited until the pain subsided. With my eyes closed, I noticed I could understand the conversation held by the 2 bars behind the door, so I decided to listen in and focus. So you're confirming my suspicion. Those bruises are not recent, correct? One voice asked. At least half a week old, yes. The other voice replied. She sounded older and more mature. I'm also pretty certain your other hunch was correct, and that she's been raped, given the position of some of those bruises. Raped? Great, a word I did not know. My brain itched for a dictionary. Unfortunately for me, however, Candy Cane did not own one. What the fuck? The first voice said again. Who would do such a thing? Beats me. You're the security mare and I'm just a doctor. But from what you've told me, the overstallion doesn't sound very innocent. Maybe this will be the final blow we need to exile that useless bastard. If only his wife wasn't head of maintenance. The security mare gasped. Iodine, don't you care about the filly at all? The older mare chuckled darkly. Not nearly as much as you, clearly. Look, Candy, there's more important things than the well-being of one filly, and the overstallion's incompetence is causing most of them. You callous bitch. Fine, have it your way. Let's get rid of the overstallion. But no, I'm only doing this for Iron Sonata. While I agreed with your enthusiasm, we might need more evidence than simply this. We need the filly's testimony. You're right. I'll talk to her when she wakes up. Then I'll consult Mom and get this done. Do I have your permission to show others the recording of our conversation? Of course. Anything to get rid of the useless pile of trash that dares call itself our overstallion. I knew we shouldn't have trusted a male to take that role. After a presumably awkward silence, the older mare added, Oh, never mind. I'm going back to work. A dozen seconds later, the door opened, and in walked Candy Cane, the pinkest and softest pony in the stable. I almost couldn't believe I'd been scared of her a couple hours prior. I'd spent enough time with her when I was younger that I still remembered her appearance exactly. And, like me, she was a mare that would help lead the stable in the future. When I said she was the pinkest, I meant it. Her hide was a lavender pink, matching the pink of her striped mane almost exactly. The other color in her mane was a pinkish white, very close in shade to my own coat. It was long enough to reach her shoulders, and fluffy enough to conceal her compact horn most of the time. Even her eyes followed the pattern, as they were a rich shade of pink, riding the boundary to purple. Her cutie mark was a syringe crossed with a candy cane, the latter's base wrapped by brown cloth. I still hadn't asked her why she didn't work in medical with a mark like that. Despite her relatively young age, the mare seemed adult in every single way. I could tell she'd adapted to working life very quickly, and even though she exuded the competence of an adult, her eyes were still those of my kind friend. "Iron, you're awake," she said, relief audible in her tone. Candy Cane had been the only pony I'd ever told I disliked being called Sonata, and I was grateful she avoided the name. Yeah, you scared me earlier." "I know, I'm sorry. I was only trying to wake you gently and failed miserably. It's fine. Head still hurts, though." She winced, guilt spreading across her face. "How did you even find me?" I said, forcefully changing the topic. "Please don't say pit buck tag." "Nope, your tag was entirely missing. The overstallion talked to me in private during my shift, said you'd been kidnapped, which sounded like a lie since I couldn't locate your pit buck. I went to ask Brass Shine about that," she explained, taking a moment to breathe. "She told me interference could block the signal, and that this likely meant that you were in one of the upper floors. She did say to look in the vents, too." Candy frowned, continuing. "She also confirmed to me that you had been kidnapped, and that I should just keep that to myself." She paused and looked at me solemnly, before resuming. "Wait, so Mother knew I was sneaking out through the vents?" "Then I combed the 4th floor. Given how much more my pickbuck seemed to hate it there than the 3rd, I decided it was more likely you'd chosen that floor." "So, now are you going to drag me back to my father?" I knew the answer to that, but I didn't like admitting to eavesdropping. "Maybe. Answer me this first, and please be honest. Who gave you those bruises?" She knew. I knew that she knew. But was I at risk by telling her? What would happen if I denounced him now? Would she get into trouble? Would he just avoid it and then punish me? Noticing my look, Candy added, "I'll make sure he gets punished and he can't hurt you ever again. That is, if he's the one who's caused them." I really needed to get better at hiding my feelings. I sighed. I knew I was taking a huge risk, but it wasn't much compared to what he'd do to me if I let this opportunity pass up. Yeah, it was my father. He gave me those bruises," I muttered, looking at the ground and hoping that somehow being quiet would minimize the risk. "Thank you, Iron. I'll make this right, I promise. You just wait here." After she left, I waited for several hours. Having grown bored after the first 10 minutes, she may have been kind, but she didn't have any books in her quarters. I checked my pit book. It was B shift again. 5 hours and 30 minutes had gone by since the pink security mare had left me alone, and I needed to walk. I stared at the vent in her room. The odds of the screws on that being loose were pretty low, but I tried my telekinesis anyway. As I suspected, they stayed tightly put as my magic pushed on them. I went back to waiting. But 15 minutes later, the boredom got the best of me, and I was back at it. This time, I was standing on her desk, looking closely at the screw, and focusing my push on the angle where the screwdriver would normally push. I'd never attempt something as precise with my telekinesis, but I had time to waste. My headache wasn't making this easy, but the idea of going back to boredom kept me motivated. I redoubled my focus, and, after a long while, the screw budged. It had taken every last bit of my focus, but I'd managed. The rest of it was easy in comparison. My head was slightly aching from the prolonged concentration, and I decided to take a break to breathe. It wasn't like I was in a hurry, I just wanted to escape the bedroom. Said boredom only needed a few minutes to settle back in, and before I knew it, I was fidgeting with another screw in my magic. This time, I had the trick to it, and the screw came out much quicker. Next screw even quicker, and the last was barely even a challenge. I levitated the cover up and climbed inside. I didn't bother closing the vent behind me, because I was planning on being back before Candy anyway. Of course, this meant staying around her quarters as I went on my walk. I decided to seek out ponies and maybe catch some gossip or news of any kind. A few minutes later, I found a pair walking down the hallway. I'm telling you, I saw them lead him out of the stable. No, I believe you, but it's still so shocking. He wasn't very good at his job, but I didn't think they'd just impeach him like that. Impeach? I cursed my pit book for not having a dictionary. I don't know, maybe they'll give us more of a reason later. It's not every day that they just throw out the overmare. They're overstallion, I guess. So they had already exiled my father. I needed to check that out for myself, or find Candy Cane and ask her. I determined that the best place to check was my family quarters. Even if he was still in the stable, he was likely not at home during B shift, and maybe I'd find a clue. I made my way there. If my father really was gone, I'd had no real reason to stay in the vents, but I didn't want to risk it. Besides, I'd actually catch weird looks since nobody knew me. Right as I arrived, the speaker sounded, and a voice said, "Every pony with stable employment, please make your way to the atrium. We will be making an important announcement." It didn't concern me. I ignored it. I checked around the small studio apartment, but nobody was home. That had to be a good sign. I spotted a small cassette on the living room table, as well as a note. I recognized the former as something my Pip-Boy could read, so I inserted it into the slot at the front of my device. My father's voice started playing. "Sonata, you need to do something for me. I'm currently being escorted out of the stable. Brass Shina's also left, and she took the money with her. I'm just worried she didn't take a gun with her, and I fear we need to survive out there. You need to sneak into the armory and take some guns and ammunition. You will be able to still use my password to get into it. If not, you'll need to improvise. My username is Concerto, and my password is Concerto the Great. The C, T, and G capitalize, and the rest is small. I need to go now, and you need to do this for me. Please, it's important." His voice sounded stressed, as he spoke quietly but fast. Mother was out there as well. I didn't know what to think. The rational part of my brain just told me to let him rot and hope for the best for her. The less rational part of my brain was yelling at me for even considering that. They were my parents, and I had to help them. If I didn't, Mother would be all alone with him. And even with all his faults, could I really abandon him? He did beat me, but was that really enough to leave him die? He was the overstallion after all. I couldn't blame him for being so stressed with a job like that. But most importantly, Mother was out there as well. Why would she leave? Was he lying? One look at the note confirmed what he'd said. Mother said she felt guilty for letting him hurt me like that, and that she was leaving the stable as punishment. This settled things. No matter what he'd done to me, I couldn't just leave them to die. Besides, now that he wasn't overstalling anymore, he'd be less stressed and wouldn't hit me anymore. I went into his room and opened the vault, looking for confirmation. Just as he said, it was completely empty. So I would be all alone. That was making things right, separating me from my parents. I trotted over to my mom's room and found a couple of screwdrivers on her desk. I picked up the smallest, as it seemed to be the only one that seemed to be able to fit through the grates covering the vents. Screwdriver in my mouth, I walked back to my room and climbed back into the vent and went to the ground floor, and headed towards the security quarters. Luckily for me, the area seemed empty. That, however, was where my luck ended. As expected, the only way into the armory was through the front door, as the vent itself was closed off by a metal grate with no screws attached. I probably could open it by removing the screws holding it in place, but to access those, I would likely have to disassemble the whole duct around it. I moved to a vent overlooking the room that led into the armory. I needed to get down there and open the door with the terminal. This meant I had to do the incredibly tedious task of opening this vent from the inside. I floated the screwdriver through the gaps in the grate. Since I couldn't see the screw, my telekinesis needed to be significantly more precise. I focused my magic on the tool. Given my headache, this proved difficult. As I concentrated further, my red magic enveloped it entirely, and I applied torque. My magic fizzled as I lost focus, and the utensil fell a few centimeters until I caught it. I tried again and failed. The cycle continued for another 3 attempts, until my spell failed so spectacularly that a bout of pain burst in my head, and the screwdriver fell to the floor. I didn't know telekinesis could fail like that. I took a deep breath and made another attempt. I managed to firmly grab the screwdriver and press it into the cross, and started turning. The screw sat calmly, seemingly unaffected by the torque I was exerting on it. I redoubled my efforts, and my horn flared brightly, illuminating the dim duct shaft in angry crimson. The screw budged, and then came out completely, before falling to the ground. I couldn't imagine how hard it would have been to do this without a screwdriver. I think that screw would have been a pain regardless of visibility. My head throbbed, but that didn't stop me. I turned my attention to the screw right above that one. Unlike the first one, this one didn't pose any challenge whatsoever. The third screw proved challenging again. My magic fizzled twice, but the third time proved to be the charm, as I managed to pull it out with a single push. The last screw showed similarly low resistance as the second one. With the cover loose, I entered the room through the open duct. I'd already lost enough time opening the cover, so I didn't move any furniture to walk on. I exited the vent and attempted to levitate myself on the way down. I only managed to slow my fall a little, but enough to be able to land on my 4 hooves. Still, I'd been dangerously close to falling flat on my face. What was it with me and making poor decisions lately? I walked to the terminal, clicked on it, and it greeted me with a "Stable Tech Terminal. Please issue your Stable 4 username and password." I entered my father's credentials. The terminal gave me 3 options. Unlock door, unlock maintenance vent, and exit. I selected the first, and heard a hiss from the door. I clicked the second option, and then logged out of the terminal. Once inside the armory, I used the terminal inside to lock myself in. The shelves were full to the brim with guns. Some long, some short, some wide, some thin. They were marvels of mechanical engineering. So many moving parts, so many screws. Guns were seriously cool. Snapping out of my awe, I decided to pick up a few and look at them closer. I didn't know which to pick, so instead I opted for 2 guns. One short, light one, fairly certain it was a pistol, and a longer, wider, and much heavier one. I didn't know what it was. I levitated up the pistol and inspected it in detail. A cylinder placed in the center of the weapon protruded from both sides. At the back, a spring-loaded mechanism could be found. It seemed to be made to hit the back of the gun, like some sort of hammer. 2 small levers were also on the left side, as well as a text that read, Model 6520. One of the lever switches was set to safe, whatever that meant, and the other didn't have any labeling. I pressed the trigger, and watched as the little hammer cranked back, and then rapidly snapped into place. I loved this thing. I put the gun down, and as much as I wanted to inspect the bigger one, I forced myself to look around the room for ammunition, and found boxes full of bullets on the left shelf. No matter how hard I looked, none of them seemed to fit the pistol. I got lucky with the bigger gun, and found some cylinders that fit into the opening in the bottom. The large opening underneath the pistol seemed made to hold something bigger. Maybe something that could itself hold bullets. I looked around the room once more, this time not even knowing what I was looking for. I noticed something I recognized as barding, but none that would fit me, and I wouldn't be able to carry it out for my father. Next to the armor, I saw a strange arrangement of straps. It seemed made to hold weapons. Putting it on, I adjusted the straps. I checked my pip book, curious to see if it was enough to change the inventory tab's content. To my delight, it did. It simply read, Military Weapon Harness. That was progress, as it had always otherwise been empty. Glad to finally get it out of my mouth, I put the screwdriver into my left pocket. Finally, I found some other metal objects, seemingly made to fit into guns. I compared the metal things with the hole at the bottom of the gun. Finally, I found one that fit into the pistol. I figured it would be a good idea to have two of them. I rummaged around for ammunition that could fit in it, then filled both of them and took 20 spare bullets and placed them in the right pouch of my harness. Full of cartridges, the two things, I really needed to figure out what they were called, were much heavier than originally. I inserted one into the pistol, making the unlabeled lever click, and then I strapped the other bullet holder onto my harness. I checked my pip book. Maybe it would somehow give me a better name than bullet holder for them. The screen's white letters informed me that the pistol was in fact a 10mm pistol, and that it had a spare magazine full of 10mm rounds. So that's what it was, a magazine. After strapping my 10mm to my side, I filled my left pouch with 20 cylinders and strapped the big gun to my back. I checked the pip book again. The big gun was apparently a shotgun. Aren't they all guns that shoot, though? The cylinders were referred to as buckshot shell, 20 gauge. Having decided I had everything I needed, I used the workbench to my right as a stepping stone, knocking a book off of it. Then I clumsily struggled to climb up the shelf, and in front of the vent. From this side, the screws holding the cover would pose not even the slightest challenge, hopefully. So I decided to unscrew them using only telekinesis. I was good at this. I had found myself in the ventilation system again, and looked down to pick up the cover. Instead, the book I'd knocked down previously caught my attention. "The Mechanical Marvels of Firearms," read the cover, illustrated with the weapon. It couldn't hurt to have resources to understand the things I'd picked up, could it? I put the book into my left pouch, and, before I could feel uncomfortable from the weight imbalance, I felt it shift, and noticed my ammunition had moved to my right pouch. Right. Probably my pip book. I think I remember something about an inventory organizing spell. Convenient. Next, I needed to get to the stable door. Reaching the door's general vicinity would not be an issue, and neither would be opening it. I had an overstallion's credentials, after all. My issue was getting out of the vent. I didn't know if I could manage to open another cover from the inside. I considered my options. I could just walk there, but I was armed from head to hoof, and likely to catch too much attention, and end up being stuck. Being in security, I was close enough to the exit that making a run for it wouldn't be possible. But I still didn't like my odds. What if I combined approaches, though? I could bring my guns to a vent near the door, then walk through the halls to the vent, and open it from the outside and levitate my things. That sounded like a solid backup plan. I made my way to the exit following my pip-box map. As I'd feared, the vent screws were held in place tightly. Moreover, it was high up from the ground. While I suspected I could eventually unlock the vent from inside with enough fiddling, this was much higher than before, and I was not going to jump so far down. Maybe a cleaning closet would be a better place to stash my things, I wondered. Making my way through the vents, I found one, where I unstrapped my harness, leaving it near the edge of the duct grate, so that no pony on the floor inside the closet would see it. I walked back to security, and made sure the halls were as exceptionally empty as they'd been for the past hour. Maybe I didn't even need to take this back and forth route. Better safe than sorry. I exited the vent in the armory after checking no pony was in the meeting room. I didn't encounter a single pony on my way to the exit, and the vast majority of white bars were in the direction of the atrium, confirming my theory. I arrived at the cleaning closet and made sure no pony was around. I climbed the shelves, careful not to lose my balance. I unscrewed the vent cover where I'd previously left my harness and levitated it out of the duct and down into the stable floor. I followed suit, almost falling flat on my face. Back on the ground, I untangled the straps and put it on. My exit from the stable was about as unceremonial as you could get. I unlocked the terminal, opened the door, and stepped out. The door closed behind me with a clang as I walked into the dimly lit cave on the other side. "Sonata, is that you?" My father's voice resounded in the large, empty space. A few moments later, he stepped into view, then approached me. "Thanks, Celestia, you brought guns. I've been here for an hour, and I haven't seen a sign of your mother. I think we were tricked, especially since they immediately changed the password after I walked out." "That's odd. His password worked for me." "At least you were loyal to me. You wouldn't betray me like her. Brass is nowhere to be seen. She knew I'd thrown out. She didn't even bother to wait for me." "Well, didn't that make sense? She left because of what you did to me." "Give me the guns, now. Also, we don't have much food, so we're gonna have to ration." If we hurried, we might be able to catch up to her. And even if we didn't, we could always look for her until we found her. I still couldn't really grasp why she left without a word to me. Didn't she realize I would end up all alone? Maybe she couldn't bear the idea of forcing me outside. No, that didn't sound like her. Actually, in fact, none of this sounded like her. Normally, she'd try to fix things. Still caught up in speculation, I didn't react fast enough to his liking. "So Nana, you little bitch, listen when I talk to you!" He screamed in a tone I knew too well. He started walking towards me, and I reflexively closed my eyes as he got closer. Pain flared in my cheek, and I was sent reeling to the side as he hit me with the back of his hoof. The air was knocked out of my lungs as I fell into my bruised rib. It was my fault for getting lost in thought when he was talking to me. I should have known better. "Now give me the guns before I beat you to death and leave you to rot!" he barked. I gasped in shock at his threat. I was no longer useful to him, so it made sense he would want to get rid of me. Realizing my mistake, I hurriedly focused my telekinesis on the straps holding the pistol in place. Panicking, I struggled to get them open. On my third attempt, I poured magic into it, and finally managed to unholster the gun. When I grabbed it in my aura, a horrible thought filled my mind. He wouldn't be able to kill me if I killed him first. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't just murder my own father. Now that I was out here, he was my everything. "Come on, you stupid bitch," he whinged. "It's not that hard." At that moment, something in my mind clicked. Why was I letting him talk to me like that? I pointed the weapon at him and saw his expression instantly turn to shock. "Hey, watch where you're pointing that!" As I didn't comply, he added, "Think carefully about what you're doing." Even his posture changed from imposing to defensive. "You can't shoot me. You won't survive out here without me." Hearing him plead for once filled me with such joy. I wasn't sure if I'd ever felt this happy about something before. I was positively ecstatic as he continued to shrink back. The wider my grin, the wider his eyes. "Please don't do this," he begged. "I know I've not always been the best father, but I promise I'll be here for you now. Together we can survive. Even out here, I'm sorry. I'll do better." Well, he did have a point. I had no idea what I'd gotten myself into, and being with him only improved my odds. Plus, this might be the chance to finally make up with him and properly become a father and daughter. Now that he wasn't overstallion anymore, we could spend so much more time together, and if I was careful, I'd manage to avoid making him angry. As my mind wandered, considering actually forgiving him, the voice of reason within it pulled the trigger. And nothing. The pistol just clicked harmlessly. His expression turned from fear to confusion, before gradually becoming more and more amused. "You don't even know how to use a pistol without me," he guffawed as he started walking towards me. "How can this be? I'm sure I loaded the bullets right." My mind flashed to the inspection session I'd had in the armory, and the little pin set to safe. "Of course, a safety mechanism." My telekinesis clicked it on the other notch. "Those things are dangerous. Of course they have a safety." Concerto's eyes went wide in horror and understanding as he started running at me. He clearly hadn't been expecting me to comprehend what a safety switch was. At least not this quickly. I aimed for his head again, delighting in the horror on his face. Was this what it felt every time he hit me? If so, then I could forgive him. This was godly. I giggled merrily as I pulled the trigger right before he reached my position. The pistol roared delightfully, and I felt the recoil along the clicking of the internal mechanisms of the gun in my telekinesis. Guns are so cool. I observed in fascination as red fluid with chunks of his brain burst out behind him, splattering on the cave's ceiling, painting a gorgeous pattern resembling a constellation of red, six-pointed stars. I marveled at the beauty of the picture before me, observing as the liquid dripped down from the ceiling. Entranced, I couldn't help but let out another chuckle, which quickly turned into a hearty laughter. Now this was fun. For how long had I been repressing those thoughts? I'd been beaten so many times that I'd learned to completely tune out any idea of ever standing up to him. But no. He couldn't tell me what to do anymore. He couldn't control or hurt me. And as long as I had a gun, I would make sure nobody else would. I will end the life of anyone getting in the way of mine, I vowed to myself. Just like that, my biggest tormentor was dead. I was almost filled with regret as I realized that the moment was over. Such ephemeral joy. I should have made it last. I also felt a weird tingling near my hindquarters. Curious, I turned my head and immediately noticed it. An image of a long-barreled gun adorned my flanks, surrounded by red stars and held afloat by black wings. I had my cutie mark. Best day ever. Footnote. Perk refreshed. Telekinetic precision. You've got a steady horn in your head for fine manipulation using your telekinesis. New perk. Sadistic. Some ponies like knitting, others like chess. You enjoy herding ponies. Possibly only a subset of ponies, possibly all ponies. Whatever the case, you are a psycho in the making. You deal slightly increased damage to every pony you like herding. But who cares about that?